Peter, so our second episode of Small Business by the Numbers, very exciting. And it's great to have this after Small Business Saturday, the quintessential holiday spirit for small businesses across the country and actually internationally. So I've seen a few small business days being marketed outside of the U.S., which is really great to see that it has moved across the oceans. But in the U.S., it seems like it's gone pretty well. So retail sales, as far as the data indicates, consumer spending seems to be pretty strong. And it's interesting because Small Business Saturday used to just be on Saturday, but now it has spread out to more of a few weeks before, a few weeks after, moving through the holiday season. So we're seeing a lot more of it. And, the enthusiasm for purchasing presents and gifts and all the good stuff for the retail sector has spread out. And the small business marketing part of it is just really fun to see out there.
Yeah, I think one thing that we think about here at NFIB is how life is different for small businesses than big businesses. And big businesses have huge marketing budgets. They don't have any trouble getting the word out. You've heard of Amazon. Amazon is in your mind.
Absolutely.
But small businesses, probably somewhat in your mind, but maybe not quite as present. And just to emphasize, there's a certain type of small business retailer for whom 11 months are treading water and 1 month is the make or break season. Kicked off with Small Business Saturday and right up through the holidays. So don't forget your local small business. They probably have something that is niche and perfect for that person who's hard to buy for, something perfect for your family members. So make sure you check them out. Keep them in mind when you're doing your holiday purchasing.
Absolutely. And also the restaurants. So if you're looking to get together with family members, friends, acquaintances, look for your small business local restaurant in the holiday season. But yes, Small Business Saturday has just been a really, really great marketing tool to help make sure that people have small business front and center in the holiday spending. So we're releasing our November data, which doesn't capture kind of the beginning of the holiday spending. It's more at the front end of the month, but it does give us a good indication about what small business owners are anticipating as far as sales, as far as labor employment, what they're planning to do as far as staffing. And the numbers were pretty interesting this month in that the index, there's a lot of conversation related to the delayed data out of the federal government. And so, we're looking at surveys, specifically ours for the small business sector and other private data to get a sense of what's happening out there. And for our survey, our index improved a little less than a point, but that's good. It's always good to see an improvement in our small business optimism index. And the main mover for the index, which is made up of 10 components, 10 questions within the survey, was sales expectations. So that was a really good sign. We saw a 9-point increase. More small business owners are expecting higher sales than a decline in sales. And so that movement, great to see. And, a bit surprising because oftentimes looking at the media or watching the media, hearing news reports, there's a lot of uncertainty. So people are a bit hesitant, a little concerned about where spending might increase, decrease, if people are holding back. But for many small business owners, they're pretty optimistic about sales expectations going forward.
Right. And an important factor here, too, is that is seasonally adjusted. So it's not just small businesses thinking, yep, I know that sales go up in December, and so therefore, on my November survey, I report expectations going up. Our data processes take care of that sort of inherent seasonal change. And so this is sort of net of that, meaning that these small businesses are even more optimistic about the holiday season than you would expect them to be in an average year. And that's good news because, for example, if you look at, National Retail Federation's projections for the holiday season, they're projecting growth, but slower growth than last year. So we would say maybe okay outlook, not a super optimistic outlook. And then that one specific question within our comprehensive survey comes in with a nice positive outlook, and it has that positive effect then on our overall index where we had been ticking down and we were just barely above average. Let's really call it, frankly, average within a couple tenths of was what our October reading was. And now we're a point above the historical average. And that's the direction we want to be moving in.
Absolutely.
That's I think a point is enough to say we're truly above average now. It's not just a couple of tenths. We are at 99, the average is 98, and that is great news for small businesses. Let's keep building some momentum, but glad to be moving in that direction.
Yes, it was great to see in our data. The other area that has a lot of reporting around it is uncertainty, whether it's consumer spending uncertainty, business investment uncertainty. And our uncertainty index, it's kind of remained the same band, kind of 10-point band the whole year. So it's elevated, certainly, and there's a lot of kind of hesitation out there among small business owners. But we haven't seen a huge spike like we did a few years back, but we haven't seen a decline that shows small business owners feeling more certain about the direction of the economy. And so that's been an interesting development that month after month, there's some fluctuation, but basically kind of in the same neighborhood as we've seen throughout the last 10, 11, 12 months.
Yeah, although I'm a little bit less positive on being in that same band because we saw an incredible spike of uncertainty actually in October of last year leading up to the election. The election happened, and our respondents thought that was going to give them a certain level of policy expectation and certainty, and uncertainty fell substantially after that. So in November of last year, and kind of that post-election pulse check, uncertainty was lower. But then throughout the year, it kind of reaccelerated and has often been above where it was at this time last year. And I think where we would have expected at this time last year, kind of like, okay, we're settling into like a 4-year presidency. There's no big elections coming up. The economy is in an okay position. So we would expect uncertainty to, maybe not be low necessarily, but moderate. And frankly, the levels this year have been very high. Just looking at some numbers where we kind of take our monthly survey and turn it into like a 6-month moving average. And that really emphasized that we're kind of at this like almost exponential looking spike right now where it's just been an incredibly high year for uncertainty. Now, our uncertainty is maybe not the world's most negative uncertainty in that it's a measure of people saying, I don't know. So that's like a balance between, like a midpoint between good and bad. Not the worst news, but it is something that, as we start to look towards 2026, we really want to see the band that uncertainty stays in at a lower level than the band it has been in 2025, because I think that's been one of the major challenges for small businesses in 2025 and kind of an unexpected challenge to be at quite the level it's been at throughout the year.
Yes, it's hard to operate your business. It's hard to feel confident and comfortable in making big decisions when uncertainty is elevated to that degree. Some other areas in our survey, in our November data that jumped out to me and a little bit surprising. We've talked a lot about the labor situation for the small business sector. And you and I have talked to reporters over the last number of days about what we're seeing and hearing from small business owners on this topic. And we did see a spike in hiring plans this last month. And so good news that small business owners are still interested in expanding those payrolls at their business or more of them from last month. And then we also saw an increase in those planning to increase compensation. So those labor pressures are still in the forefront for many small business owners, including still about 30% in some configurations saying that labor is their single most important problem. Right now, it's about 1 in 5 saying it's labor quality, 8% saying it's labor cost. So those two combined is really putting a lot of pressure on small business owners still on the labor front. So we have to wait a few more days for the BLS report to come out to see what the national numbers look like. And there's a lot of speculation that the employment report and the labor situation is deteriorating quite a bit, but it does still seem that the two sides of it, whether it's constraint in labor supply or labor demand, are kind of both pushing in the same direction of declining numbers in those jobs created. There's still a lot of frustration among small business owners about not being able to find qualified applicants for those positions. And right now, still looking at our smaller sample size, but enough respondents in some of these industries to get a better sense of where these pressure points are. Construction is the outlier for us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I thought this particular month's labor metrics were quite interesting in comparison to last month. So October's reading had showed, and for a little context, we have about 5 questions that are indicating the labor situation in small businesses in the U.S. And if you looked at kind of the overall of those questions, in October, they were negative, except for there's one crazy exception, which is that the percentage of businesses reporting finding qualified labor as their single most important problem spiked. So it's like kind of negative, except for one thing. And
yeah,
this
that was a little odd.
That one was
shot
like,
through the roof.
It was a big movement. It stood out. And now this report is almost sort of a mirror image, I think, of October, where the kind of overall of our kind of 5 questions on the labor market was positive. They tended to move upwards, except for that one single most important problem that kind of came, without trying to sound too negative, but crashing back to reality, where like it came back to the level where it was before.
Yeah, it level set from that abnormal spike that we saw.
And anytime you see
makes sense.
A big change and there's not something that obviously happened, it makes you go, huh. And, puts a little pressure on what you're going to see next month. And, well, the next month came out and it said that was maybe a bit of a blip, a bit more noise than signal. But I think it's great to see as well that like the rest of the numbers that were kind of negative in October, a little balanced out in November with some positivity. So to kind of expand the lens a little bit, like if you look at a graph of kind of like the last year or two, you would have worried with the October data that the sort of like slowing labor market trend that we've been experiencing for these last couple of years was potentially accelerating just a little bit. And so with the positivity we've seen in November, it's not sort of like saying the trend is reversing, but saying like, no, that slowdown is not accelerating. We're still kind of in maybe a gentle slowdown range, kind of looking at like the longer term. And, I would say it's like reducing some of maybe the pessimism you might have gotten from those questions in the October report. Hopefully we can turn the bit of positivity in this November report into some momentum, because we're at a level that is pretty low, getting borderline for the economy in terms of like the labor market and its strength. But good news here in November. So I think that's definitely a second positive aspect within this report to add to that, sales number we started off talking about.
Absolutely agree. And it transitions nicely to one of now my favorite questions in our survey that we introduced in February, the self-evaluation health of their business. And that, again, since February, has remained basically in a pretty tight band of the same percent of owners saying that their business is doing good or better. And right now, about 2/3, 64%, are saying that, their business is rolling along and doing well. And that's been the same for the last number of months, which is a great sign that we aren't seeing any deterioration on that end. Retail, a few less in that camp of self-evaluating their businesses doing good or better. So we'll have to see how that evolves over the next number of months. These numbers are not seasonally adjusted, so we'll have to check in again where they are in the retail sector after the holiday spending spree. But right now, it seems that most of them are doing pretty well going forward. And we've seen some reports out there about, say, increased bankruptcies, or is this a sign that things are deteriorating in the small business space? Well, most small businesses don't declare bankruptcy. They just close their business. And if things are deteriorating, they're going to tell us that their health of their business isn't doing so well as it was, say, last month or the previous quarter. And we're just not seeing any sign of that right now, which is another kind of bright point in the November data. But for the varying industries that we look at, we'll see how those in retail, say construction, services, wholesale, how they do going forward over the next few months. But that was a good sign for the November data, and that small business owners are self-evaluating the health of their business as doing pretty well.
Yeah, and that's a really important data point to add for folks who are maybe a little bit skeptical of sentiment surveys in general, of NFIB's Optimism Index, especially really more of it's like a consumer sentiment survey phenomenon. But when you have a question that's, a little bit more vague, like what's your sense of the economy in general? Like, we have a question about, that's a little bit economic sense in general. We have one about kind of environment to expand your business. Having these sort of expectation questions is also a good thing in the sense of like we're trying to be prospective, look forward, like figure out how businesses are not just reading what they got last month, but also what they're thinking about for next month. So we can, really help policymakers, investors, businesses themselves plan for the future. But having that business health question is super concrete. It's just like, tell me the facts. Like, how is your business feeling right now? And the story that that's saying is like very directly in alignment with our optimism index. So
yes.
I think that's something for people who are sort of saying like, I'm not sure how much I want to pay attention to a sentiment index. Well, sanity check it. Look at this specific business health that is not general economy. It's not future expectations. Just literally,
it's very specific.
What are you experiencing right now? And people are, there are some people saying poor. There's some people saying fair.
Sure, and that's going to happen in every type of economy.
Yeah.
But we're not seeing any movement, and that's from month to month what we're looking at to see if there's any deterioration or improvement among the general health of small business. And they're doing pretty well, and it's stayed within a fairly tight band over the last number of months, well, since February when we started asking the question. And that's been a good sign because, as you and I have seen over the last number of months, there's just been so much speculation about where the economy is headed with all these reports, especially of large businesses shedding employees. But, they went on a hiring spree a few years back, so maybe they're still just right-sizing and figuring it out. But as far as the small business sector, generally they seem to be doing okay, which is great news.
Now, I do want to mention, I would say, for me, the one negative aspect of this report. We saw some positivity in the labor market, positivity on sales, but on kind of supply chain inflation type metrics, the news was not super great. So what we look at kind of this category in a couple of different ways. We have one specific question about supply chain difficulties, and the percent reporting some level of difficulty increased by 4%. And that was unfortunately driven primarily by people saying they were experiencing a significant, sort of like that was a significant supply chain as opposed to moderate or even just mild. So that was a bit of a negative. And then that also then seems to be impacting actual prices. So the percent reporting increasing their average selling prices spiked in our November data. It was actually one of the biggest, or it was the biggest increase in the history of the index. And I would say, like, before we go crazy, we had that huge increase in October's single most important problem, skilled labor, and it was like, why is that happening, such a big change? Let's take that with a pinch of salt and wait for next month. And next month comes along and says, that was probably more noise than signal.
Sure, yep.
And I think that we should have that same, a similar at least, pinch of salt with the somewhat random, substantial increase in this average selling price. But the one sort of concern where I wouldn't take it quite with like maybe the same pinch of salt I took the October single most important problem is that, well, we have that other separate data on supply chain saying that that's getting worse as well. And then there's some expectations and so there's just a couple other pieces of the puzzle that are in alignment with inflation pressure and that price pressure.
And we also saw an increase in those saying their single most important problem is inflation.
Yeah.
So that kind of goes along with all of the other increases in prices and compensation and everything that kind of drives inflation for small business owners. And so, yes, I totally agree that is something that over the next number of months, if this is going to turn into a bigger issue. And, I feel like we kind of buried the lead, leaving it to last, because there's so much focus on inflation, whether it's still an issue for small business, if it's still an issue for consumers. Affordability is, one of the tag words that's used a lot now because it is hard for a lot of folks to afford basic purchases, and moving into the holiday season that might be just more pronounced in the frustration of folks. And that also includes small businesses and small business owners trying to absorb those costs and pass along to consumers. They're consumers, but remain competitive. So it's a real stress point for many small businesses. We're still seeing it in our numbers, this inflation pressure that's more elevated than we typically see. Certainly not where it was a few years ago, but it's still a concern. It's still there. It's still putting pressure on small businesses. And we did see a spike and kind of more concern about that in the November numbers this time.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's something that policymakers really need to be watching out for, and that's both sort of like legislative, executive, but also, of course, the Federal Reserve Board, which has been thinking a lot about setting interest rates to kind of balance out its dual mandate of employment, where we're seeing that like a little bit of positive news to counteract some like more negative news in the past to say softening labor market, which speaks to lower interest rates. But then inflation signal here is just a little bit high. Like you said, single most important problem, the supply chains, the price increases, it's all pointing in a pro-inflation direction. And that's a headache for the Federal Reserve because that points towards a need to raise interest rates. So
we're just muddling the picture for them, unfortunately.
It's a tough situation.
But, as you said, we'll see in the next couple months whether this turns into a bigger thing or if this was just a 1 month spike. But it is something of concern that inflation is still a fairly prominent challenge for small business owners. And, we're seeing it in our data for those folks. So I think to wrap up again, Small Business Saturday, it's elongated over a few more days than normal, but it sounds like consumers are out there, paying attention to the small business sector, which is a really, really great sign to see. And we can't wait to see what comes next in our December data. And as always, our survey is released the second Tuesday of every month at 6 a.m. I don't know if many of us are awake at that hour to see it. Some of us are, just to make sure that it all goes smoothly, but 6 a.m. second Tuesday every month. Our data is available, and looking forward to the next episode of Small Business by the Numbers. Thank you.